This is a variation of the old proverb that was about, if a man is given a fish, he'll eat for a day, but teach him how to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime. And this is very much the case with phishing as it relates to social engineering as well. Those who are adept at executing this particular style of social engineering attack have almost unlimited potential to exercise this particular type of scam. Now, before we go on and start looking at specific phishing attacks, let's just do a quick definition. You're probably already familiar with the term, but this will hopefully get us all on the same page. And really what we're looking at here is an attempt to acquire sensitive information. So very typically we'll see the social engineer using a phishing attack to obtain things like credentials, a username and password to a site, or other very sensitive personal information, answers to security questions. And inevitably, the objective here of the social engineer is that they have malicious intent. They then want to turn around and monetize this information in some fashion. Now, their ability to be successful is often determined by how well they can masquerade as a trustworthy entity. And this is what you're going to see as we progress. So how can the social engineer, mounting a phishing attack, convince the victim that they are indeed on, say, the bank's website and not a phishing website, or that the victim is entering details into a Facebook social login and not into a malicious page stood up by the attacker? All of this comes down to how good a job the social engineer can do of their phishing attack. Now, before we move on and start looking at actual attacks, I want to give you a few stats on just how effective this particular mechanism of social engineering really is. This is from Verizon's 2015 Data Breach Investigations report, and it's a staggering figure. So nearly a quarter of all recipients of a phishing attack open the message, and then 11% are clicking on attachments. Now, you'll see many different figures about phishing attacks from many different organizations, but the one constant you'll find is that they always show a very high level of success for the phisher. Now, this is not one of these attacks that relies on a 100% success rate to be effective. You only need one person within an organization that's being phished to open that attachment and allow something malicious to execute within their environment for the attack to be successful. So in this case, 11%, when you're possibly sending out thousands or even hundreds of thousands or millions of emails, could actually be a really high success rate. Now, it's because of this that we see phishing featuring so frequently in online attacks. More than 2/3 of the incidents that Verizon looked at in their report featured phishing in one way or another. Often it'll be combined with other attacks as well, but phishing played a part. That's how significant this form of attack really is. Now let me share just one more stat before we move on, and it's this one. Response average by motivator. This was put together by PhishMe, who provide a service for you to mount ethical phishing attacks in order to train your organization. Now, what's really curious here is the emotional motivators. And this goes back to the human weaknesses that we discussed earlier on in the course. So people are motivated to open phishing emails, open attachments, and even then follow links to websites which request personal information from them based on these human weaknesses. We've looked at things like fear and urgency and curiosity already. Reward is incentivization. I referred to it as greed. If you do this, you will get money. Connection, if you can be convinced by someone who you think you know to perform a particular action. So I really like the way PhishMe is representing emotional motivators because it ties back phishing to social engineering. And it just goes to show how the adept phisher is able to target the human weaknesses within all of us by well-crafted phishing attacks. Now, just before we start looking at some actual phishing emails, I want to touch very briefly on several real-world examples of where phishing has been successful. This is a great example of just how effective a phishing attack can be, and indeed how significant the real-world ramifications can be. Back in 2013, the Associated Press's Twitter account was compromised due to a phishing attack, and a fake tweet about an attack on the White House was posted. Now, this had a real-world ramification in that investors, thinking that this was a real terrorist attack, rapidly sold off stocks, causing the Dow Jones Industrial Average to fall more than 150 points. Now, it quickly recovered after that, but the point was that this phishing attack was successful and it did have a significant impact. 150 points on the Dow is a very significant amount of money. So that's one good example. Let's look at another one. In 2011, the security company RSA suffered a very serious attack. After the incident, the root cause was traced all the way back to a phishing attack, just like the one here in this wide story. In fact, this was a phishing attack that was sent to the parent company, EMC, and the attackers targeted 4 co-workers there with an Excel document called 2011 Recruitment Plan. The document contained a malicious payload that exploited a 0-day vulnerability in Adobe Flash, and that then managed to drop another malicious file on that individual's computer, which gave the attackers a foothold into EMC's network. Now from there, the attackers eventually made their way into RSA and managed to steal information relating to the Secure ID two-factor authentication implementation. And it all began with an email just like this one and one person that opened the attachment. That's a pretty serious example, but there's one more I want to show you before I move on, and it's about a very familiar name. In 2013, the huge US retail store Target suffered a major data breach that resulted in the theft of 110 million credit cards. Now, this theft was due to malware running on the point-of-sale terminals. But the question was always this: how did it get there? Eventually, the attack was traced back to an HVAC provider. So HVAC is heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And what we're talking about here is another organization that did business with Target. They managed some of Target's facilities. They were the victims of a phishing attack, and due to their access to Target's network, the attackers managed to pivot through environments and ultimately compromise the POS terminals. That turned out to be a very, very significant data breach, and it all began via a phishing attack, not even on Target themselves, but on a partner. So those 3 examples hopefully put into context just how serious phishing attacks can be. Let's move on and start to have a look at some phishing emails, and in particular the call signs that help us identify them as a social engineering attack.